So what I want to do is talk through paper one and just make sure everybody's ready. I know it's due on Friday. I've had students say, I know some students have gotten kicked out of their dorm or are finding new jobs and all that kind of stuff. So I usually, yeah, I've done the camera and it's just not picking me up for some reason. I don't know why. I can't get the camera. But, so we'll have to just do it without a picture, sorry. But, so I usually, if a student turns in a paper late, I don't count off much. If it's 1 or 2 days late, if it's 5 or 6 days late, I might take off 1 or 2%. This year, I'm not taking anything off for late papers, but that's not good news for you because I don't want to encourage procrastination, which is not going to be good for you at all. So I would encourage you, get the paper done, get it turned in. I'll be more understanding in grading this year. Hopefully you got a lot of it done before spring break. But turn it in as quickly as you can. I keep assuring you that the second project is far more straightforward. And so, so definitely, don't worry about that until you finish paper one. So are y'all ready? Here we go. I'm gonna talk you through paper one, walking through the rubric that I use to grade it. And so you start off with an introduction. And what you really need to do anytime you do a paper like this is have at least a paragraph where you tell the audience or the reader something about your bank. So in this paper, I'm going to do an assessment of Bank of America's risk management process. Bank of America is the second largest bank in the U.S. with $2.whatever trillion in assets and $300 billion in net worth. Maybe go to Yahoo Finance and get the profile for the bank and bring in, don't just copy and paste the whole thing in, but some key terms. It's a major consumer bank. Just some things that give your readers some insight to who your bank is. Okay. Every once in a while, someone chat, everything's working well, just so I know you're still there. Because if I completely lost everybody, I won't know, and I'll be talking to myself for some time. All right, so that's your intro. Who is the bank? If you have any questions on that, bring in your questions. Then part of the intro, definitely want to have a strong statement and look through that very first section of the risk management. Look at your paper and make sure you have a strong declarative statement about the bank's philosophy about risk. I can't imagine all of these banks don't have something very, very strongly stated in that first or second paragraph. Most of them are going to say something along the lines of risk management is the most important thing we do, or it's central to what we do, or something along those lines. So make sure you have that, but it's best as a quote. And in fact, I would center it and italicize it and make it really stand out. One thing I'll say on formatting, I saw one student's paper this week. 2 columns is fine. I like 2 columns. It looks more professional. But if you use 2 columns, shrink your margins down. I'm recording the audio, but I can't get the video. So I will have a recording of the audio. So Jacob, so if you use 2 columns, make sure you narrow your margins to 1/2 inch. I would full justify, and the paper I got this week was double spaced. He might have done that just so he could write notes in it. But when you turn it in, don't turn any more college papers in double space. It looks really very unprofessional. So just get out of the habit. I know double space gives you more pages, but that's not what you want. You want it to look as professional as possible. All right, so you have your intro to the bank, a key phrase about their philosophy, and then you get into the roles. Who's involved in this process? The board, management, the auditors, and the committees. So you need a discussion on that. So make sure that's in there. I don't need a detailed discussion on the committees. Do make an attempt to try to figure out what is the key committee. Almost all of these banks have an ALCO committee, ALCO, an asset liability committee. And then they probably have other committees. committees. You don't need a detailed discussion on those. Some of them are so convoluted, it's almost impossible to figure out. That may be part of your discussion. Is my word, they have 6 committees that look like they do the same thing. I can't figure out who's doing what, who has authority. What does the audit committee do? Do they have a chief risk officer? Those type of things. So hopefully you can find that. And then any overarching process or philosophy that they have, that they talk about, especially if you see something from the standpoint of define, measure, mitigate in the introductory section, all right? Let me know if there's any questions on the introductory section. It usually goes 1.5 to 3 pages depending on the bank. If you're specifically having trouble with your bank, email me or call me, and I'll load your bank's annual report and help you through that. I know it's far enough into 2020 that you could do their 2019 annual report, but 2018 is fine. If that's what you started with, just stick with it. No need to change. Obviously, the whole world has changed anyway in the last 3 weeks, so 2019 is out of date as well. In fact, 2019 is probably not any better than 2018 now anyway. So, all right, so I'm not seeing any questions on the intro. Then the next section, I don't care if you do market risk or credit risk next, but I'm going to start with market risk. So then you get into market risk. Make sure you have a quote here. I want you to get the bank's definition of market risk. They might call it market risk, interest rate risk, price risk, but I want you to quote the bank. I don't want you to give me your definition. I want to know, what is this bank's definition? If you like, you can quote the bank for a sentence or two and then say, I believe what this means, or put it in your own words, so that you can understand. You can show that you understand and have good critical thinking on the definition. But the definition does not need to be a lengthy part of the paper. It can be one paragraph. For a lot of students, it's just one paragraph. Some do break it out a little bit more than that because the bank has different departments, especially on credit risk. But don't feel like the definition has to be a lengthy part of the paper. Then you get into measure. And here on measure, the way I'm going to grade it, just so you know, so this might encourage some of you to contact your classmates, is I'm going to grade bank by bank by bank. And as I read the papers, I am going to list what each student lists as a measurement. So your grade will be heavily influenced by what your peers do. So if your peers on average list 5 things and you have 3 things, that's going to definitely influence. So if you want me at the end of this to find some way to let you connect by bank so you can compare notes, I have no trouble with that. I don't think you know who's with your bank, do you? I don't think I've given you that information, so I can certainly work that out if that would be helpful to you. But you understand how I'm going to grade this, though. I can't go through and read the annual reports of every one of these banks, even though I have a pretty good idea of what they do. I'm going to let you help me with that as I grade your papers to help me get a comprehensive list. So measurement on market risk, almost 100% of the time, if not 100% of the time, will be value at risk. That is a huge part of it. And then the second one you will see probably every time is stress testing. So those two I just automatically assume will be in there. I know in class we talked about balance sheet immunization and duration of net worth. Duration of net worth and balance sheet immunization, those are really related to either building a model to do value at risk, or they're related to doing stress testing. So what we did mainly with the plus and minus 100, 200, 300 basis points, those are the stress tests. And you probably will see your bank doing something similar to that, but not using the exact terms we used in class. So that's the measurement. Those two, I would assume all of you will have, stress testing and value at risk. And then some of y'all might have earnings at risk. I've seen it all different ways. Those are essentially stress testing types of things. So some banks might have 4 things that are really all stress tests. So what I recommend you do is you have a section on stress testing and then discuss those different ways that they do that. All right, I'm not seeing any questions on measurement. So for market mitigation, again, list your mitigations, and I'll let the class help me grade that by who has, I'll use your list to help me assess other papers. Mitigation almost always has to do something with diversification. It could have something to do with making sure you don't have too much in one entity. It can have to do with risk limits. I think risk limits is a big part of this. There could be risk limits on value at risk. So you might say, hey, we can't exceed this dollar amount, so we've got to make sure that our value at risk is below this dollar amount. So risk limits is probably one of the major ones there. For all of your banks, it should be derivatives. I imagine all of your banks use futures and swaps and swaptions and options of some kind. It can help your paper greatly because most banks will have a table that shows their derivatives exposure. So I would, try to find that and put that into your paper. So that's market risk. Most students score much better on market risk than on credit risk because it tends to be more straightforward. All right, so that's what I'm looking for with market risk. Any questions through market risk? Everybody still with me? All right, good. Wow, good. All right, so let's go to credit risk. Again, on credit risk, make sure the first thing I should see is a quote of their definition of credit risk. Now, something I think is interesting is some banks on credit risk, there's two parts of credit risk. There's default risk. All right. I just asked that I give y'all who's in which bank. I'll do that. I don't know how you get each other's emails, but I'll try to figure that out in some way. Maybe I can send as a group an email who's in your group, and then maybe I don't know. We'll figure that out somehow. All right. So on credit risk. All right. Okay, Benicia, I'll look for that. All right. So credit risk had the definition. One thing I think is interesting you might look for is there's two ways to look at credit risk. One is actual default, and the other is downgrade. When a firm is downgraded, they don't necessarily default, but their price will fall because they're downgraded. Some firms put downgrade risk as part of market risk, and some firms put downgrade risk as part of credit risk. You can tell it from the definition. So you see your definition of credit risk, if it says it's the risk of default or downgrade, then they're counting downgrade, a firm being downgraded, say from triple B to double B, is part of their credit risk, not part of their price risk. But that's just something interesting to look at. I've seen it both ways with the banks that you have. Some banks do it one way versus another. So there are important things to consider in these definitions. They're not just generic. Every bank does the same thing. There are some important distinctions. Measurement of credit risk. It can be value at risk. I see that a lot. It can be stress testing. You also should see things like aging schedules. So how many loans are 30 days behind due? How many are 60 days behind due? Those type of things. The other thing I see a lot are internal credit ratings. So for consumer loans, you might see things like FICO scores. For corporations, you may have internal ratings. So that's pretty popular. I'm not giving you the entire list of measurement, but just making sure you're thinking through all of these things. So again, I'll grade it based on what the class itself provides. On mitigation, there's some really simple ones that students leave out, like collateral is a mitigation. So a loan to value requirement is a mitigation. So if a firm does mortgages and they'll say we'll only loan out 70% of the housing value, that is a mitigation. It protects them it's not a measurement, it's a mitigation. So they're saying, hey, if you're borrowing $300,000, or if you have a $300,000 house, we won't loan to you more than $210,000. We won't loan you more than 70%. That is a mitigation. So do that. You also, I think almost all of your banks do credit default swaps, so that should probably be part of that. Again, you have that document out there that I gave you that has a list of some things that you can look at. So, things like diversification, making sure you don't have too much loaned out to one company, risk limits, all those things, you'll see that in the mitigation. All right. Any questions up to there? I'm not seeing that. Okay. The next thing I want you to do is, in your final conclusion, this is the final part of the rubric, I want, don't get owned by this bank. Don't feel like you're advocating for this bank. I want your honest assessment. I know it's very, very difficult. You're dealing with a lot of jargon, but these are very huge, complex entities. How confident are you? And what you could do is say, if you are the new CEO, so let's say Jamie Dimon steps down because of his heart condition, and now Cameron Rowland, you're the new CEO of JP Morgan. How confident are you walking in as the CEO of JP Morgan that they've got risk management under control? Is this like something to say, wow, I'm really glad they've got this process in place, or wow, I've got a lot to learn. This thing is so convoluted. I don't think it's really in good shape. I want your opinion. If you don't know, then flip a coin. If it's heads, say it's really good. If it's tails, say it's really bad. Do something. Force yourself to have an opinion on that. It's a big part of the paper, and it's where students lose a lot of points, because a lot of students, it's just a bunch, I think they did a good job and it looks good to me and everything looks good. Think back to everything you saw, and does it sound like this bank knows what they're doing? And I know that's a really kind of arrogant thing for a college student to ask, how about a firm this complex, but go out on a limb and give your opinion on what you think. So that's the paper, and that's how I grade it in those sections. So any questions at this point? So I'm not seeing any. Obviously, I can't, if you all email me your paper, I can't grade them all. I can't look through them quickly. Yeah, Benicia, I never say how long it should be, but it should be long enough. If it's 1 or 2 pages, that's way too short. If it's 50 pages, that's way too long. I've had papers that are shorter that did really well, and I've had papers that are longer that did really badly. So as long as you do all of those sections, on each one of the measurements, define it and give some sense of what they do. Each of the mitigations define it and some explanation of what they do. If they've got a table or a chart that you can put in, you can do that. As far as Benicia, as far as me reviewing them, if you email it to me and ask for comments, I'll give you very high level comments. If you email it to me and call me, I'll go through it in more detail. So those are your choices. My fear is I'm going to get 60 emails to review my paper, and y'all just know it's just not humanly possible for me to look in detail at that. But if you're willing to call me, I know students won't call me because they just don't do that. I know I won't get more than 5 or 6 calls. I can handle that. If you email it to me, I will look at it. I'll glance through it fairly quickly, but I won't give you a detailed feedback with just an email. And part of my problem with email is I can't type a long explanation back. I can talk to you, but I can't type a long. It's just too time consuming. Other questions? All right, so what I'll work on tonight is get a list of students by banks, which I have in the attendance, and then I'll send that list out and somehow get you the roster. I'll figure out how to do the roster. I think I can create an email list from ASAP and just email the class from that with that list. At this point, the only time I can't help you is in the mornings. I'm on my bike every morning for about 4 hours. But anytime after that, from 1 o'clock until 10 o'clock, you can definitely call me. You don't have to set up a time, but if you want to email me for a time, that's fine. Well, it takes me a while. Yeah, I'm a slow biker. All right, someone asked me to go over the final conclusion. So a final conclusion, a typical conclusion, you don't want to repeat what you said, but just a typical conclusion. But then what I want as part of that conclusion is your assessment of whether or not this firm's risk management is in good shape. So think about being the CEO, the brand new CEO of this company. You just read this risk section. How confident are you that this bank has it under control? Are they too big to fail? Are they too complex? Or do you think they really have a good handle on what they're doing? I'm not grading you on that based on whether I agree with you or not. I'm grading you based on whether or not you really put some thought into it and thought critically. That's the critical thinking part of the paper. Any other questions, comments? And obviously you can email me later, but your questions here, the whole class gets to see. All right, I will create a YouTube just for the audio. It won't be too spectacular. Well, if they have a table, Lucas, that shows that, any summary table that you can put in there is fine. The 42 trillion is, the notional amount. Look and see what they have. One thing I think, Lucas, is a good question is, don't put a table in just to put a table in. Look at it and see if it actually tells you something. But if you want to show that, wow, they really do use derivatives quite frequently, then, and that gets under to credit mitigation, those netting agreements. Every bank that does a lot of derivatives will have those netting agreements. Make sure that's in your mitigation. Any other questions?